Hey guys, this review is late in a number of ways. I am technically going to be doing an ARC review today, but this book came out last week actually. I am just kind of really behind on my reading. I haven't done an ARC review in a couple of weeks. I've been finishing up some projects for some summer jobs that I have, and it's just been really busy. So I am trying to catch up to the best of my ability, and I am both excited and also bemused to talk to you about the book that I have today because it is a follow-up to a book that Michaela and I reviewed together, and we had thoughts, and I have thoughts about this one. And some of them are the same and some of them are the complete opposite. So we're gonna talk about it. So the book that I am reviewing today is called Heartstrings by Ivy Fairbanks. This is the second book in Ivy's Love in Galway series. Michaela and I did a joint review of the first book in this series called Morbidly Yours. You can go ahead and watch that review for more. There are not really any spoilers for that book in this review unless you don't know that the two leads in romance novels get together, because the wedding of those two folks, Callum and Lark, is the setting for a large chunk of the beginning of this book. Now, in Morbidly Yours, we were introduced to the two leads of this book as well. There is Cielo. She is technically Lark's cousin, but they are very close. Lark is about 6 to 9 years older. I can't quite remember, but Lark went through some hard times, and so did Cielo or Lo and her family, and so they kind of interact a little bit more like sisters. Lo had leukemia as a child, and it drove her parents' marriage apart, but it did leave her as a Latina woman to really look into why and how both Latina women are underrepresented in medicine, and also how Latina people are more likely to get certain types of blood cancers. And so that propelled her into a career in medicine, and she is now working as an attending doctor and trying to finish med school. Aiden, the male lead in this one, was introduced in Morbidly Yours as Callum's solicitor, who also played music on the side. You find out that since he met Lo and she encouraged him to do music full time, that in the interim, there's about 2 years between the end of Morbidly Yours and the start of Heartstrings. He signed a record deal and became kind of like vaguely slow level famous with his first album. Like I said, this is set 2 years after the events of Morbidly Yours, and the opening, if you will, is that Lo and Aiden have not seen each other for over a year. After they met, their original meeting in, Morbidly Yours, which is supposed to be kind of like a 1 to 3 night stand situation, before Lo realized, because she was living in the States, that she wanted to attend medical school in Galway. So she moved there, and after she moved there, she and Aiden kept meeting up, and they eventually became an item. However, a year earlier or so, when Aiden was given his record contract, he was told that he needed to live in London for it. And Lo, who had her family fracture because her dad was traveling all the time to help pay for her medical treatments, really just didn't believe that they could do long distance, and there were some other things going on, and so they broke up. So they haven't spoken in a year, but it is Callum and Lark's wedding. They are the maid of honor and the best man, respectively, and so they are going to be thrown together during this wedding, and to help kind of like put it all together and attend it and all that type of stuff. The events leading up to and of the wedding are a huge chunk of the plot of this book, as various wedding-related hijinks occur. Lark is an inveterate meddler, and she knows that Lo and Aiden still have some unresolved things going on, so she is absolutely, not subtly at all, doing her best to kind of throw them together, whether it's having them make the party favors together, or Aiden accidentally drops the ring in a stream after Lo accidentally pushes him into the stream off a bridge, and then they have to go swimming to find the ring. You know, these things happen. But there is the storyline of them kind of dealing with their unresolved feelings about their breakup, but also dealing with some different life events. As I mentioned, Aiden is into that like second album like stress with his label, where the first one really worked, but it was really inspired by Lo, and then he didn't have her anymore. And so when his like later music wasn't up to snuff, the record label is trying to drag him a more pop star way, which is not what he wants to do. He is an Irish folk singer. And Lo, like I said, she is still in medical school. She is, you know, doing her rounds, her like internships at the various hospitals. And also she has her yearly checkups to see if her cancer has come back. And during the events of this book, she does get a report from her yearly physical that her white blood cell count is elevated, which is a sign that the cancer may have come back. And that begins a second set of events that are going on in the background. So there is a lot packed into this book. And it is both in some ways handled better than some things were handled in Morbidly Yours, and in some ways not as great. It's really interesting. So in preparation for this video, I rewatched me and Michaela's joint review of Morbidly Yours. And one of the things that struck me was how much we enjoyed the humor of Morbidly Yours. The humor and heartstrings does not hit for me in the same way. It felt more natural and interesting in Morbidly Yours, and I don't know if it was because of the mortuary and like the just like funnier little happenstances that can happen. But some of the things like, you know, dropping the ring in the river, and I think some of that was supposed to be funny, but it like just didn't hit as well. Like a lot of the humor in here felt a little bit more forced than it did in Morbidly Yours, which was unfortunate. I think one of the reasons is that this novel is carrying almost more like emotional grief baggage than Morbidly Yours was. Now in Morbidly Yours, you have Lark, who is like, you know, healing after the death of her first husband several years ago, and Callum dealing with some family business drama. But for this one, the heart and soul of the story really is Lo's story as a struggling, you know, a woman whose illness, she feels a lot of responsibility for, and struggling with, like, as a doctor, knowing that it's not her fault that she got sick, not her fault that she was sick, but also feeling the responsibility of having driven apart her parents' marriage, but also being very resentful of her mother that after, like, all this time, and like her mom pulled her out of school, she homeschooled her, like she became really possessive of Lo's like health and keeping her healthy. And now even as an adult who lives, you know, on another continent, her mom is like obsessively like checking the calendar and like, you know, did you go to your yearly appointment? Like, you can't drink, you shouldn't be having candy, like you should only be having kale. And really kind of treating her daughter almost as if Lo can't take care of herself. And at one point, Lo is like, you do realize I have a vested interest in keeping me alive, right? And it's like her mom doesn't believe that. So there's like a very strained relationship there. And her parents are divorced now, but the distance with her father became a lot earlier. He was a traveling salesman who worked overtime upon overtime trying to pay for Lo's medical bills and the fact that her mom wasn't working. And he just basically just like became extremely distant from the family until it just didn't work anymore. And then they did get divorced. And Lo just has this, like, again, complicated feelings of, I know that he was out there breaking his back, trying to make sure that I was taken care of and my mom was taken care of. But at the same time, he wasn't there when I needed him. And so it was just like very complicated. There's a lot going on. And it really is like the emotional heart and soul of the story in, I think, not necessarily a sadder way than Morbidly Yours. Morbidly Yours was definitely like, I'm healing and I'm finding myself again. And this one is like, there's a lot going on. And I'm just like trying to swim. It does make Aiden's storyline feel kind of like not as important as a result, even though this is a dual POV novel, because again, his is like, you know, he's gonna be famous and he's trying really hard to be famous. And there is, he's not being famous for fame's sake. You know, his family came from nothing. He feels that he is like the one who is now supporting his entire family and making sure they have a nice place to live. And like, how are they going to be able to take care of themselves? Like, they're his parents in old age. And he feels a lot of pressure from that, but it just doesn't feel as deep in any way as Lowe's. One of the things we mentioned in Morbidly Yours was that the plot felt a little bit uneven, including the romance and the plot itself. I felt like, once again, the romance here was a little bit uneven, and I think it was because, like I said, there were moments like that felt like, oh, I have to hit this beat of a romance novel now, and so we're gonna have like that scene where they're gonna like kiss, and then, you know, they're like, oh no, this is a bad idea, then I'm like separate. Like, a lot of these things are beats that happen in a second chance romance novel. Unfortunately, a lot of them just kind of felt like they were like, oh, time for this now, and then they happened, which again was very uneven with the same thing that happened in Morbidly Yours, which was this incredible emotional undercurrent. I mean, I've talked about Lo and her family now a lot. I don't need to go into it, but like, there is such a strong emotional core, like, and multiple angles in that story, that sometimes it was like, oh, they're gonna kiss now. I was like, okay, sure. Because that just didn't seem to carry the same emotional weight. And I think part of it is like the romance, like as far as Aiden is concerned, like they are meant to be together, they're gonna be together, like he's gonna convince Lo that they are meant to be together, and it's Lo who again has to kind of like figure out how to safely let someone in when, you know, she has all these hang-ups about being left because she was sick, and feeling like, you know, she has to be able to do so much on her own. As much as I am a proponent of the dual POV novel, it really felt like there was so much important stuff being said about what happens in families that deal with these types of illnesses in a very, very empathetic and caring way, trying to like unpack all of these like nuanced feelings, that I almost was like, I kind of wish Aiden didn't have a storyline. Like, that it could have been really focused on Lo and what was happening to her. Because like I said, it did, I think, make then the pacing was uneven, because then we're having these scenes where like Aiden is talking to his agent and being like dressed up in designer clothes, and I'm like, yo, does Lo need a biopsy or not? Like, it just felt a little bit uneven, and like I said, not as funny. And so I think that also added to the emotional weight. Like, we were very aware of the stakes and all of the interaction with Lowe's and her family. What I will say is that, unlike Morbidly Yours, when Michaela and I were so confused by the ending, is that this one has, I think, a really, really strong ending that does not result in the like 2/3 of the way / 75% of the way through, oh, we've got to break up and like figure it out now. Going back to that stronger emotional core in this book, that would not have been natural. And thankfully, Ivy really recognized that and wrote a much more interesting, like, yes, tension, but not that, like, fall into the ending with the happily ever after. And that did feel much, much more, like, satisfying and interesting. And I really, really appreciated that. At the end of the day, do I think that this book is better than Morbidly Yours? Yes? Question mark? Because a lot of the things that I really liked about Morbidly Yours, like the characterization of Lark and Callum and the mix of their personalities and their storylines and the humor, I found it very cute, are not the same story that is here. This is a very different feeling story. And on the one hand, that's a really good thing, right? Even though these are in a series, quote unquote, these are very different characters with very different backgrounds and very different things happen. But from a writing perspective, that does mean different things. So for example, it's not really Aiden and Lo that I'm interested in. It's more like low story with Aiden kind of circling around. It's not as funny. So if that was something that you were hoping to like continue to get from Morbidly Yours into this one, that's probably not going to happen. This one felt a lot more deeply emotional and filled with generational drama. But at the same time, it did have a far more emotionally correct, plot correct, satisfying ending that did not necessarily just bend to the romance trope in that moment, but let that stay true to the emotional core of the story and play out all the way to the end. I felt that it was really important to make this review just because I do feel like Morbidly Yours and Heartstrings are just enough tonally different that I think that there's a world in which if Morbidly Yours was not your jam, Heartstrings might be if you like those sadder romances. But at the same time, if you liked Morbidly Yours, Heartstrings might not be your jam for some of these reasons. However, if you are someone who likes that dichotomy, is interested in that, there's also very clearly a third book in the series being set up that is very clearly enemies to lovers from one not so meet cute that happens in this book. So there will be more. And I'm definitely really interested to see what happens, because there's definitely like a lot of really, really good things that I like in Ivy's writing, but there's some of them that still for me just need to be smoothed out, and I'm interested to seeing her get there. So this has been a little bit of a long review, but I was just so interested in how these books were similar and different from each other, and I wanted to talk about it, so I am going to stop. But that was why it was so important, even though this review is late, that I actually get it out to you guys. So hopefully you enjoyed. Like I said, you can read Morbidly Yours or Heartstrings without reading the other. There's enough in Heartstrings about Callum and Lark, but maybe from what I've said, one of them is more your jam than the other. These are both out now, so you can make your own reading choices. Thanks guys, bye.